super excited for today's video. I'm going to get to discuss some real Papa Bear Tim type of subject matter. If you're new here and you're not used to these videos, this is a good place to start. And I also want to let you know that I'm offering free 15-minute consultations. Free 15-minute consultations to people who are new and, want to talk to me on the phone or Zoom briefly to get a sense of, what I'm getting at, basically. So you can contact me at radicalcounselor.com if you're new here and would like a free consultation. What I want to talk about today is related directly to the last video, in the sense that so much of this advice is you have to subjectively apply. And as Vadim Zayland talked about brilliantly in Reality Transurfing, so much of life is about variability. There are different ways to do things. And things that work for you today might not work for you next week, let alone a year from now. And this certainly goes in terms of spiritual practices and more specifically, manifesting advice, trying to feel differently inwardly to manifest a better external reality. So what I often talk about and what I really want to hone in on today is most of the advice you hear when it comes to manifesting things, law of assumption advice, law of attraction advice, is wrong in terms of helping you right now. It's not relevant to you right now improving your life as much as you might think it is by listening to the great old teachers or the modern quote-unquote gurus on YouTube and Reddit and TikTok and Instagram talking about this stuff. It's not as straightforward or cut and dry as it's usually presented to be. I love presenting this stuff in a very gray way where it's like, well, you can maybe do this or maybe do that. This might mean this might mean that. And you figure it out for yourself in a good way where like you are your own best teacher. And there's all these great teachers from yesteryear that can help guide you, but you shouldn't expect that everything they're saying is correct because they're wrong a lot of the time in regards to your situation. It doesn't mean that they're intentionally misleading you whatsoever. It's just nobody's right all the time. Or another way to look at that is everybody's right all the time. You know what I mean? It's just different interpretations, it's variability in life. And, in my book, The Law of Attraction Simplified, I say like, if you, listen to a teacher or read a Law of Attraction book and get like one thing out of it, or like, 5% of what the teacher says you really agree with and are able to implement, that's success right there. And even, I would argue, even the greatest teachers that have affected you the most, in the Law of Attraction, I don't know who that is, or Law of Assumption, Abraham Hicks, Neville, people like that, even their stuff, I would argue, I would apply the 80-20 rule to it. I would say that 80% of the stuff that a great teacher that you really resonate with, like say Neville, even that is not relevant to your actual life situation. Only 20% of what he's saying, I would argue, is actually relevant to what you're going through right now. And in all likelihood, what you will go through, which means the other 80% is not relevant or is wrong in regards to how to live your life, perhaps. And obviously, that goes for me too. Any video I make, any podcast episode, any book I've written, all the advice I'm taking, just take most of it as a grain of salt. I'm just trying to get a few things across to you. And what those few things are is going to depend on who you are, right? So it's a lot more confusing than we're led to believe usually. And again, that's why getting someone that you resonate with to help you and to point out that things are confusing and not straightforward is very helpful. Connecting with a teacher or a coach or somebody who you trust to make it clear that things are not as black and white as all these YouTube gurus usually make it seem. Manifesting is a highly subjective, variable experience from person to person. And I was looking through an old notebook of mine from last night, I think from like 2019, so like 4 years ago or so. And I wrote down this quote. I apologize if I don't have it exactly right. But I get this newsletter from this kind of contrarian indie publisher. He's a writer and like a publisher. He gives publishing advice to indie writers and publishers, which, you know, I am. His name's Nicholas Eric. Nicholas Eric. I'll put a link below in the description to his website, and you can sign up for his newsletter. He writes good emails. He's still at it. He still writes emails. But this is from his newsletter, like, I think like 4 years ago. And thank you, Nicholas, for sharing this wisdom. This is really, really, really good advice, what I'm about to read. And I apologize if this isn't the exact quote because I wrote it down. It's not actually directly from the email. But what Nicholas Eric wrote in this newsletter from back in the day, and he was talking about book marketing and how books are published and, you know, how to present them to people and so more people read them. But obviously he's really talking about a more general theme in this quote. What he wrote is, he said, most people explaining how to do things seem to fall into two camps. Number one, they haven't done it, ergo, their advice is incorrect. Number two, they have done it, but they don't know why, got lucky, or can't explain it. Ergo, their advice is incorrect. That's some fucking spot on analysis of not just book publishing, but any field. And certainly the manifesting, law of attraction, law of assumption field that we see spoken about all the time. And especially on places like here, YouTube, with assholes like me talking to you about these concepts. I'm going to read this again. Most people explaining how to do things, like LOA, like manifesting, seem to fall into two camps. Number one, they haven't done it. Ergo, their advice is incorrect. This, just to give you an example, this is like most people who comment on this stuff, especially law of assumption people. They haven't actually done it, but they're just quoting Neville, and they don't know what the fuck they're talking about, to be frank. Number two, they have done it, but they don't know why, got lucky, or can't explain it. Ergo, their advice is incorrect. This is basically everybody else. There's a lot of good teachers on YouTube and social media, obviously. It goes without saying, there's a lot of great, manifesting teachers out there. But often what they've done, they don't actually know why they've been able to do it, or they aren't able to explain it. Their situation, again, is very particular and idiosyncratic to them and does not pertain to everybody else. However, they think it pertains to everybody, even though it really is a very individual situation that they've gone through. In other words, they manifest things in a very particular certain way that works for them, but probably will not work for most other people. Yet they make it seem like it should work for everybody. This is a big problem in the online space when it comes to this stuff. And it's, again, why I'm saying don't trust anything that anybody says. Trust yourself. If you're skeptical a little bit of what people say, you naturally then figure out what to trust and what makes sense to you. So don't be negative. Don't be overly cynical, but be wary of what you hear. And in my opinion, like I said, this goes not just for the current teachers, but this goes for the great teachers that we talk about all the time. Neville, Abraham Hicks, Joseph Murphy, Florence Scovel Shinn. People like that, too. Everybody's wrong a lot of the time. I think I wrote here, I don't think Nicholas wrote this, I think this was my note. I wrote the sum takeaway being, most advice is incorrect. Filter things accordingly. Again, he wrote, most people explaining how to do things seem to fall into two camps. Number one, they haven't done it. Ergo, their advice is incorrect. Number two, they have done it, but they don't know why, got lucky, or can't explain it. Ergo, their advice is incorrect. Nicholas Eric went on to write, then the third camp is people who do know what they're talking about. These are the books and sources you should not just read, but reread. Study over and over again. But be careful here. Many experts are people who know what they're talking about, overstep their field of expertise. They start believing their worldview applies to everything, that their opinions in unrelated subjects hold weight. That's super important, what I was touching upon before when it comes to great LOA teachers overstretching their boundaries. To give like just like a current example too, someone like Elon Musk, right, who's brilliant in a certain field, then tries to apply his worldview to everything, and he looks like a moron doing it, in my opinion. But we see that across the board. You get people who are really good at one thing or have a certain genius field of expertise, and then they try to apply that genius field of expertise to everything and say this is how the world works. Well, the world doesn't work that way. And I would argue that people like Abraham Hicks, or entities, channel, things like Abraham Hicks or Neville or whoever, they often try to fit everything into their certain box, and that it actually ends up detracting from their teaching. As I often say, like if I want to learn how to manifest something, somebody like Neville is who I'm going to go to, right? I'm not going to go to Elon Musk to learn how to manifest something, probably. I'm going to go to someone like Neville, right? But Neville's a manifesting teacher. If I want to learn how to take a lot of action to make things happen, I don't know if I would go to Neville. And that's part of the manifestation process too, that Neville doesn't talk about that much. But you see people who just, they follow Neville's advice and they basically sit on their butt and expect things to just magically appear out of thin air, which can happen, but it's probably not going to happen for 99% of people who apply the advice, at least not consistently. At least more like 99.9% of people who apply Neville's advice in that way. We need to have a little bit of skepticism and common sense when it comes to this stuff in order to better apply it in our lives. And we need, hopefully, some voices of common sense to tell you that. I just thought this was a great advice from Nicholas Eric. Again, I'll link to his website below. I'm going to read it one more time. Most people explaining how to do things seem to fall into two camps. Number one, they have not done it. Ergo, their advice is incorrect. Number two, they have done it, but they don't know why, got lucky, or can't explain it. Ergo, their advice is incorrect. Then the third camp is people who do know what they're talking about. These are the books and sources you should not just read, but reread, study over and over again. But be careful here. Many experts are people who know what they're talking about, overstep their field of expertise. They start believing their worldview applies to everything, that their opinions in unrelated subjects hold weight. Good stuff. Hope you dug it. Papa Bear Tim, amped in the car. Gonna go inside and drink some more coffee. Get even more amped up. If you have questions, if you'd like coaching, I can be reached at radicalcounselor.com. Until next time, be skeptical.